it rolling, Bob?
It's Chris Gregory here, and this is Bob Dylan, A Headful of Ideas, Season 3, and this is episode 22. And today I'm going to be talking about often very underrated but very popular album, judging from the comments I get from 1978. Street Legal is often seen as marking a transitional point between Bob Dylan's mid-1970s triumphs with Blood on the Tracks and Desire and his upcoming and, for most of his fans, highly unsettling religious period. After the Rolling Thunder tour ended in mid-1976, Dylan was off the road for the whole of 1977. Much of his time in the intervening period was spent co-editing his massive film project Ronaldo and Clara. That year was also notable for the death of Elvis Presley at the age of only 42, a tragedy which left Dylan devastated. In 1978 he put together a new big band featuring keyboards, pedal steel, additional percussionists, a sax player and a trio of black female vocalists. The ensemble may have been partly modelled on the group that Elvis used in his endless Las Vegas residency. Jerry Sheff, who played bass on the latter part of Dylan's tour, had actually been a member of Elvis's band. For the first time, Dylan appeared in elaborate stage costumes. The shows would begin with the band playing an instrumental version of one of his best-known songs, usually A Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall, before he, as the star, made his appearance in true showbiz style. It would not have been terribly surprising at the end of the show if an announcer told us that Bob has left the building. This is quite a unique tour, the 78 tour, and it's often been called the Vegas tour. Perhaps it's Bob's tribute to Elvis. The new music may also have been influenced by the live shows of Bob Marley, who used the I3s, his backing vocalists, prominently, and Bruce Springsteen, for whom sax player Clarence Clemons was a literally massive on-stage presence. Dylan would take his new band on an extensive jaunt to Japan, Australia, Europe and the USA, which lasted for most of the year. His 1978 music has a unique sound, and many of his familiar songs are now being presented in startlingly new arrangements, as showcased on the Live at Budokan album. That album was recorded in the spring with the same musicians during a short break from the tour. That's Street Legal I'm talking about. Its songs are especially concerned with the dilemmas he was facing at that particular time. Few of them were performed on subsequent tours. Street Legal was a rather schizophrenic album. 4 of its 9 songs, Changing of the Guards, No Time to Think, Senor and Where Are You Tonight, revived the kind of arcane symbolism that Dylan had been so fond of in the mid-60s, as well as displaying his newfound interest in mysticism, especially with regard to the symbolism of the tarot pack. The other 5 songs might be called twisted love songs. Love songs have always formed an important part of Dylan's repertoire, from early nostalgic odes like Girl from a North Country to easygoing romantic ditties like New Morning. Blood on the Tracks is an entire suite of songs about broken relationships. Desire ends with Sarah, a desperate plea to his estranged wife in an attempt to save their doomed marriage. After the failure of this marriage and the commercial disaster and large-scale critical rejection of his cherished film project, not to mention the death of Elvis, Dylan was living through something of a personal crisis. The twisted love songs portray him as confused, angry, and at times even suicidal. In this context, it's not surprising that Dylan turned for inspiration to one of his first loves, the Delta Blues. The great majority of Delta Blues songs were written by men who lament the fact that their women have deserted them. The women in these songs are usually blamed by the singers for what's gone wrong in their relationships. In Robert Johnson's genuinely scary 3220 Blues, later recorded by Dylan during the Good As I've Been to You sessions in 1992, the singer even threatens to shoot his lover. Yet the blues singers rarely portray themselves in a good light. Despite the abuse that they may be directing at the woman who done left me, they often come over as weak, confused and powerless. After the instrumental introduction, Dylan began each of his 1978 shows with an old blues number. The most commonly performed were Tampa Red's She's Love Crazy and Love Her With a Feeling, both songs in which the male narrators express extreme awe and respect, which borders on fear for sexually confident and independent women. In the 5 Twisted songs, Dylan immerses himself in a blues persona, expressing his own uncertainties through the voices of narrators who sometimes seem to be uncaring or unpleasant, especially towards the women being addressed. But as with the songs of so many Delta blues singers, this show of machismo only exposes the narrator's own insecurities. In terms of musical form, however, only the vituperative New Pony can really be called a blues song. It's the first pure blues track he had recorded since obviously 5 Believers, Pledging My Time and Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat on Blonde. But while those songs had been reflective or comic, New Pony is dark and deliberate. It's thematically based on the great blues progenitor Charlie Patton's extraordinary Pony Blues, in which his departed girlfriend is likened to a pony who the singer is determined to mount. Yes, they weren't very politically correct, these blues singers, were they? Like many blues songs, New Pony does not tell a chronological story. Its verses could easily be presented in a different order. They outline the narrator's intense emotions, painting a picture of an extremely insecure narrator who is not in any way reasonable or caring. In true Delta blues style, he's conducting a futile attempt to assert his masculinity. He invokes the name of the devil. "I had a pony," he declaims in his best gravelly hardcore blues voice. "Her name was Lucifer." The first verse is nominally about an actual pony who broke a leg and needed shooting. The narrator tries to win our sympathy by trotting out the old cliche that "I swear it hurt me more than it could have hurted her," but it is obvious from the outset that the pony is really a woman. Although he attempts to command her, we are left in little doubt as to who really holds the reins in the relationship. As with the many blues songs, the first line of each verse is repeated for emphasis. The backing singers ramp up the tension by chanting the insistent refrain, "How much longer? How much longer?" The next verse switches subjects. The narrator muses darkly, "Sometimes I wonder what's going on with Miss X," and he strings us along a little, trying to elicit a little sympathy by stating that she's got such a sweet disposition, but in the following line, "I never know what the poor girl's going to do to me next." He's back in darker territory, suggesting to us that she is teasing and tormenting him. We then switch back to references to the pony, who knows how to foxtrot, lope and pace, a line derived from Son House's variant on Pony Blues. More extended sexual metaphors follow. "She got great big hind legs, long black shaggy hair hanging in her face." Meanwhile, the backing vocalists keep chanting their refrain, which now appears to imply, rather ominously, that the narrator's patience is running out. He then addresses the girl directly, accusing her of using voodoo, telling her that "I've seen your feet walk by themselves." He tells her that "that God you've been praying to gonna give you back what you're wishing on someone else." It's kind of like voodoo, isn't it, really? Given the previous mention of Lucifer, that God is, of course, the devil, who the paranoid narrator now fantasizes will be preparing some very unpleasant payback for her exercise of her supernatural powers. Despite this, he finally gives in to lust. "Come over here, pony. I want to climb up on you one time. You know you're so nasty and so bad, but I said I love you. Yes, I do." The song is a dark meditation on male sexual frustration and an expression of anger at a woman who the narrator feels is merely stringing him along. In the end, he just cannot wait any longer. Dylan uses the word nasty in its erotic sense, implying that the woman is sexually powerful. But as in so many blues songs, he appears to live in fear of such a woman who seems to be a major threat to his masculine ego. The other love songs on Street Legal do not adopt a conventional blues format, but could all be said to be influenced by the blues, especially in the way their narrators seem to be enthralled to the women referred to in the songs. In Baby Stop Crying, the main emotion expressed by the narrator seems to be annoyance or irritation as he struggles to cope with a very emotional lover. The song may have been inspired by Robert Johnson's Stop Breaking Down, in which the singer expresses similar feelings. Baby Stop Crying utilises the full Street Legal band with all its grandiose musical textures. The organ, played by Alan Pasqua, puts a smooth gloss on a sound which is slightly reminiscent at times of the texture of Like a Rolling Stone. Unlike Johnson, who sounds frustrated and angry, Dylan's narrator is generally compassionate. Despite its blues influences, the song is constructed like a melodramatic pop anthem with a strong repetitive refrain. In Britain, it even had some success as a minor hit single. But it differs from the typical blues song in that the narrator appears to admit his own faults and mistakes rather than trying to hide behind incoherent machismo. The first line, "You've been down to the bottom with a bad man, babe," is ambiguous. Dylan does not actually spell out who the bad man is, but the evidence from the rest of the song that suggests that he himself is that bad man who has caused her all the pain she is expressing. The narrator tries to be reassuring. "You're back where you belong," he tells her, but this does not seem to provide any consolation. In the extraordinarily self-deprecating lines, "Go get me my pistol, babe, honey, I don't know right from wrong," he appears to be admitting that he has treated her appallingly. In recognition of this, he is preparing to shoot himself. Whether he does so is not revealed, but the repeated pleas for her to stop crying in each of the 4 choruses appear to reveal that there is very little that, having let her down so badly, he can say to console her. Although he tries some reassurance in the unconvincing and rather obvious line of the choruses, "You know and I know the sun will always shine," this seems to do nothing to stop the flood of tears. The narrator's admonitions continue to be vague and unconvincing. "Go down to the river, babe," he tells her, "and I will meet you there." He even promises to pay her fare, which, perhaps not surprisingly, appears to have had no effect. And then, adopting a more soothing tone, he attempts to present himself as a friend. "If you're looking for assistance, babe, or you just want some company, or if you just need a friend you can talk to, honey, come and see about me." But the genuine compassion for someone who's suffering, which had been conveyed so believably in an early song like To Ramona, is largely absent here. The attempt at empathy in the final verse is rather misplaced. "You've been hurt so many times," the narrator tells you, "and I know what you're thinking of. I don't need to be no doctor, babe, to see that you're madly in love." Well, this is rather patronising if, as we surely suspect, it is him who she is madly in love with. It certainly does not stop her crying. As the song ends, his attempts to console her have clearly failed. The narrator seems, like so many classic blues singers, completely wrapped up in his own problems. Perhaps in reality, it is he who finds it impossible to stop crying. We Better Talk This Over is another song about a failed relationship. But rather than attempting to offer the woman any hope, which, as Baby Stop Crying, he signally fails to do, the narrator merely informs her in a rather chaotic and emotionally numb manner that their relationship is finished. The song has a deceptively attractive melody, and the recording uses another fulsome arrangement, even including an extremely unusual double-tracked Dylan vocal. The backing vocalists echo many of the narrator's sentiments, repeating line after line, which adds to the claustrophobic and rather detached tone of the song. The string of shop-soiled splitting up cliches and mixed metaphors suggests that the narrator is trapped in a state of confusion, reduced to delivering increasingly weaker excuses for his own behaviour. The song opens with the narrator and woman feeling particularly depressed and suffering from a shared hangover. The narrator's assertion that "I'm only a man, doing the best that I can" is really rather pathetic. The way he rejects her in coldly detached language is particularly brutal. Why, he asks her, should we needlessly suffer? He suggests that they should go their separate ways before we decay, an image which offers little consolation. When he sings, "You don't have to be afraid of looking into my face, we've done nothing to each other, time will not erase," he seems to be implying that relationships had been basically meaningless and quite possibly mutually abusive. Then he descends further into maudlin self-pity. He informs us that he feels displaced, and makes a brief accusation that she has been double-dealing, presumably two-timing him. He tells her, using a rather weird mixed metaphor, that "I've been caught in the trance of a downhill dance," addressing her rather condescendingly as "child," and asking, "Why do you want to hurt me?" In a line that will soon prove to be ironic, he adds, "I'm exiled, you can't convert me." As the song progresses, the narrator sings into hopelessness. Lines like, "It'll be great to cross paths in a day and a half, look at each other and laugh," and "I don't think it's liable to happen, like the sound of one hand clapping," are strangely incoherent. The reference to the Zen phrase, the sound of one hand clapping, is particularly contrived. Later mixed metaphors become even more convoluted. Why should we keep watching each other through a telescope? Eventually we'll hang ourselves in all this tangled rope. That's a real mixed metaphor. Well, brush off lines, don't think of me and fantasize about what we never had. Be grateful for what we shared together and be glad. It could only be called shallow and patronizing. Finally, he declares in a rather awkward collocation, I wish I was a magician. I would wave a wand and tie back the bond that we've both gone beyond. A one-off live revival, performed in Anaheim in 2000, features a harsher and thus perhaps more appropriate vocal. The lack of humanity that the completely self-absorbed narrator displays here is almost breathtaking. As with Baby Stop Crying, it may be that Dylan is turning inwards again, conveying a picture of a soul in torment. The song can also be taken as a somewhat desperate message to Dylan's audience, perhaps even his whole generation, almost as if he is signing off in despair from his role as a public poet. All that's left, it seems, is a hangover. True Love Tends to Forget is something of a conundrum. It's a more compassionate song, but it still conveys a considerable degree of negativity and despair. Despite this, the song comes closer to a melodramatic pop style than any of his previous compositions. In some ways, it even resembles the work of the perennially unfashionable but always popular Neil Diamond. The backing singers are used more sparingly here, mainly as support on the many repeated refrains at the end of every verse. It seems that the narrator is desperately trying to reassure himself that the true love is really a factor in this relationship. In reality, he appears to be participating in another basically meaningless tryst, so much so that he is barely present in terms of emotional engagement. The song begins, I'm getting weary, looking into my baby's eyes, a clear reversal of a typical romantic cliche. When she's near me, he confesses, she's so hard to recognise. Perhaps the narrator has had so many casual and meaningless affairs recently that his partners seem to him to be interchangeable. But something about her seems to have triggered some elements of his conscience. He declares that, I finally realise there's no time for regret. Perhaps he's decided to be honest with this lover about how he really feels, but unfortunately it seems from what follows he does not feel very much. Perhaps, however, he really does not know how he actually feels. And this is a bit of a feeling that tends to linger around a lot of these songs from this particular period. From the second verse onwards, he switches to a direct address. In this case, however, he does not appear to be giving his lover her marching orders. He at least puts up the presence of making a romantic appeal, beginning with the rather tender, if doubtful, hold me baby, be near, you told me you'd be sincere. But then he spirals off in a similar path to we'd better talk this over, resorting to a series of rather strangely disconnected metaphorical phrases which present a very negative view of the relationship. He tells her that every day of the year is like playing Russian roulette, and later that this weekend in hell is making me sweat. These, of course, can hardly be called romantic entreaties. Lines like, you're a tearjerker, baby, but I'm under your spell, you're a hard worker, baby, but I know you well, are equivocal at best. Eventually, he criticises her for keeping me knocking about from Mexico to Tibet. It seems like a rather random phrase thrown in to make a rhyme. By the end of the song, the hints of romanticism have all but disappeared. Perhaps the most beguiling part of the song is the repeated bridge section, in which the narrator appears to be imagining himself in a variety of strange geographical locations and odd situations. First of all, we hear that I was lying down in the reeds without any oxygen. There's no explanation of where these reeds are or why lying down in them means he cannot breathe. This may be some kind of metaphor for how he feels choked by the relationship. The next line, I saw you in the wilderness among the men, gives us a jump cut into another mysterious scenario entirely. I saw you drift into infinity and come back again is a more evocative line, suggesting that his vision of her is alternately fading away and getting brighter. He promises her that all you have to do is wait and I'll tell you when, but no such order or revelation occurs. True Love is another twisted love song which illustrates both its narrator's confusion and his disillusionment with love itself. This is another song in which, despite the smoothness of the big band sound which dominates Street Legal, the depths of personal despair that Dylan seems to be experiencing are revealed. In the passionate and morally ambiguous Is Your Love in Vain, however, Dylan articulates such feelings in a powerful and much more focused way. The rich musical texture, which builds towards a series of understated climaxes, strongly supports this. He expresses complex emotions in a way that few popular songs have ever done. The narrator does not present himself as a particularly enlightened or wise individual, but the emotions he expresses come over as extremely authentic. Here Dylan carries out a forensic examination of the relationship between love and art. As many critics have pointed out over the years, his most memorable and resonant work had generally been produced when he himself was in the throes of personal chaos or bitter confrontation, as songs from Like a Rolling Stone to Positively 4th Street to A Wedding Song and Idiot Wind bore witness. His happier periods as a family man, living away from the limelight, produced songs like Lay Lady Lay, If Not For You, Knocking on Heaven's Door or Watching the River Flow, which certainly had their merits but could never match the songs written in unhappy periods in terms of poetic imagination and revolutionary advances in the art of song. For Dylan, being in a happy settled relationship has proved to be virtually impossible to reconcile with reaching his artistic potential. Is Your Love in Vain confronts this dilemma head on in a way that few songwriters have ever attempted. The language of the song is clear and forthright and is expressed in a stately and dignified tone. Whereas in some of the other Street Legal songs, Dylan attempts to communicate through complicated metaphors, here he appears to be speaking directly from the heart. The opening couplet, Do you love me, or are you just extending goodwill? Do you need me half as bad as you say, or are you just feeling guilt? Establishes an emotional distance from his lover as he questions whether her devotion is genuine. He sounds very wary of making a commitment, delivering the wonderfully compressed I've been burned before and I know the score, so you won't hear me complain. He then asks a very direct question, will I be able to count on you, or is your love in vain? Such a clear expression of reticence is very unusual for a love song. The phrase Love in Vain is the title of a brilliantly anguished blues classic by Robert Johnson, who laments the departure of his woman by reflecting back philosophically on his own state of mind. Dylan's narrator maintains here that he will not be reduced to such desperate emotional dependence. But perhaps this is all just bluster. The ambiguity of the address leaves room for interpreters of the song to tilt it in different directions. In Barb Younger's beautifully paced, stripped-down version, which is performed in a tone of barely suppressed emotion over a solo piano, we sense that the narrator is merely pretending to be so detached. It's even possible to interpret the first verse as an address by the lover to the main narrator, with the rest of the verses being his response. In the second verse, Dylan confronts the art versus love dilemma directly. Are you so fast that you cannot see that I must have solitude? It begins, when I am in the darkness, why do you intrude? Here, he seems to be expressing the artist's age-old dilemma in tearfully heartbreaking terms. He seems to be telling the lover that as a poet he needs to explore an inner darkness, confronting feelings that cannot be shared with others and which thus must be kept secret. This is clearly a heavy burden to carry, but in a way the line is also a declaration of independence. The narrator appears to be laying claim to this darkness as being a psychological condition that only he can understand. This might appear at first to be a rather egotistical claim, but the line does appear to be a recognition by Dylan of his own particular genius. Never normally one to blow his own trumpet, he seems, however, to have come to the realization that his career as a writer and his love life must remain separate. Do you know my world? Do you know my kind? He asks, with a hint of impatience. Or must I explain? Nobody else, it seems, can see what Dylan sees in the darkness of his inner soul, in which the origins of extraordinary poetic inspiration lie. He tells his potential lover that this inner space must remain sacrosanct. This is spelled out in no uncertain terms. Will you let me be myself, or is your love in vain? The song has one particular resonant bridge section, which seems to sum up Dylan's own attitude to the vagaries of fame in delightfully ambiguous terms. I've been to the mountain and I've been in the wind, he sings, recalling both The Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall, where he states that he will reflect from the mountain as he looks down on a devastated world, and Blowing in the Wind, which, like Is Your Love in Vain, consists mainly of a series of rhetorical questions. He then contextualises this clearly in terms of his own love life. I've been in and out of happiness, which is followed by the deft and world-weary humour, punctuated by ironic rhyming of I have dined with kings, I've been offered wings, but I've never been too impressed. An extremely Dylan-esque sentiment there. Dylan now seems to have reached a crucial point of self-awareness. Here he expands the scope of the song so that he seems to be talking about the problems of maintaining the kind of poetic inspiration he can reach in the darkness, while having to cope with the illusions of fame and celebrity which he himself has had to manage from a very young age. The song is thus as much about his relationship with adoring fans who may claim to love him as with any woman. It's also a wake-up call through which he warns himself not to get carried away with all the adulation he's received. Now that Dylan has established the parameters of how much he can give either to a lover or to his audience, he can relax. In another key moment in the song, which creates a remarkable emotional reverberation, he declares with a tiny self-deprecating laugh, "All right, I will take a chance. I will fall in love with you. If I'm a fool, you can have the night, you can have the morning too." For having told her that he will submit to her demands, he then turns the focus back on her, asking if she is really prepared to play a role in the relationship which will not involve her intruding on his creative darkness. The song climaxes with the supposedly controversial lines, "Can you cook and sew, make flowers grow? Do you understand my pain?" These lines have been taken out of context by some commentators in an attempt to prove that Dylan is a sexist, with the implication that perhaps he is suggesting that cooking and sewing is all women are good for. Such an interpretation fails to take into account that this song, like most of Dylan's work, is expressed through the persona of a narrator. Also, in other words, just because Dylan is singing this doesn't mean that that's what he actually thinks. Who knows what Dylan actually thinks? Also, the song can be sung by a woman to a man, as in Younger's version, and can make as much emotional sense. These lines, which are partly tongue-in-cheek, certainly do ask his potential lovers to find something possibly trivial, ways to amuse themselves while he is in his darkness. The implication appears to be that they need to respect that his forays into that realm are highly personal inner explorations. The second line puts great emphasis on the sacrifices and suffering that an artist must endure in order to function in such a space. And the final line, "Are you willing to risk it all, or is your love in vain?" leaves the question of whether this potential relationship will actually be successful to the listener to decide. At the same time, the entire song can be seen as an internal dialogue. Despite dining with kings and being offered wings, instances of which will inevitably occur in the future as he gathers more adulation and accolades, the singer needs to keep his feet firmly on the ground and not be distracted by all this attention. The fate of Elvis has provided him with a dire warning about the consequences of fame, of accepting so much love that one will drown in it. Like Elvis, he has been offered wings, but unlike the king, he has had the good sense not to strap them on. Otherwise, like Icarus, he may find himself flying far too close to the sun. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Please like and subscribe. I'll be back with more of this soon, and see you then. Bye bye.
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?